I spent my life helping everyone, but the moment I needed help, my family abandoned me. Hey, Reddit. I never thought I'd end up here, but I guess when your own family turns their back on you, you start looking for any place that'll listen. So, here I am. I don't even know where to start. For as long as I can remember, I've been the guy everyone counted on. My parents needed money. I sent it. My sister had car trouble. I fixed it. My best friend was struggling with rent. I covered it, no questions asked. I wasn't rich, but I made enough to help, and I always thought, well, if you're there for people, they'll be there for you, right? Yeah, that was stupid. It all started with a cough. Just a little thing at first, but then I started getting tired all the time, like bone-deep exhaustion. My appetite disappeared, I lost weight, and soon I was waking up drenched in sweat every night. I figured it was just stress. Work had been rough, and I'd been pushing myself too hard, trying to make sure everyone around me was okay. But when I finally went to the doctor, the news hit me like a truck. Tuberculosis. I won't lie, my first thought was, who even gets TB anymore? Turns out I did. And I needed treatment. Fast. The problem? I had no sick days left, and I was already stretched thin financially. But I wasn't too worried. I had a family, I had friends. They'd understand, they'd help, right? I called my parents first. Big mistake. TB? That's contagious, isn't it? My mom sounded disgusted, like I told her I had the plague. My dad was even worse. Well, that's what happens when you don't take care of yourself. Not a single word of concern. Not how are you feeling, not do you need anything, just immediate rejection. And that was only the beginning. So yeah, my parents were a bust. But I still had my sister Lauren and my best friend Jake. They wouldn't turn their backs on me, right? Lauren and I had never been super close, but we weren't distant either. Growing up, she was the golden child. The straight-A student, the one who married young and gave our parents 2 grandkids to dote on. Meanwhile, I was, well, just me. I had my own place, my own life, and while I never made a big deal out of it, I helped her out more than once when she and her husband Ryan struggled. So when I called, I really thought she'd offer something, a couch, a guest room, anything. Instead, she barely let me finish explaining before cutting me off. Ethan, I'm really sorry, but I have kids. I blinked. Okay. And? She sighed like I was the dumbest person alive. I can't have you staying here. TB is serious. I can't risk the kids getting sick. I gritted my teeth. I'm not contagious anymore. The doctor cleared me. I just need a stable place to recover. Yeah, but still, it just doesn't feel safe. Safe. Like I was some kind of biohazard. Ryan, who had been sitting next to her on the couch the entire time, barely looked up from his phone. Yeah, man, sorry, just bad timing. Bad timing. That's what my own sister and brother-in-law were calling this, as if I had chosen to get sick. I didn't even argue. What was the point? I could already see it in her eyes. She'd made up her mind the second I asked for help. I left feeling something between rage and exhaustion. But I still had Jake. Jake had been my best friend since middle school. We'd been through everything together. Bad breakups, lost jobs, that one time we almost got arrested sneaking into a concert. If anyone had my back, it was him. At first he seemed like he did. Dude, that sucks. Let me know if you need anything. So I did. I didn't even ask him to let me stay right away. I started small, just seeing if he'd hang out, grab a drink, talk. But suddenly he was busy. He stopped answering my calls right away. Texts took hours, sometimes days, to get a response. Finally, when I did ask for a place to crash, just for a bit, he hit me with, Bro, my girl wouldn't be comfortable with that. His girl, the woman he'd been dating for less than a year. The same guy I let sleep on my couch for 3 months after he lost his job, no questions asked. The same guy I covered rent for when he was short. The same guy who swore we were ride or die. Now suddenly I wasn't his problem. I didn't even respond. I just stared at my phone, feeling something inside me cracking, and it was starting to sink in. No one was coming to help me. I was on my own. After that, I stopped calling people. What was the point? I had spent years helping everyone around me, and now that I needed them, I was just an inconvenience. So I tried handling it on my own. I had some savings, but not much. Between medical bills and missing work, my bank account was bleeding out fast. Rent was due in 2 weeks, and I knew I wasn't going to make it. My landlord wasn't exactly the understanding type either. He'd evicted my old neighbor over being 1 week late on rent, and I asked about a payment plan. He laughed in my face. I looked into assistance programs, but the wait lists were months long. I didn't have months. At first, I told myself I could still push through, that I just needed one good break. I applied to remote jobs, hoping someone would take a chance on a guy who was recovering from TB. Nothing, not even a callback. Then one day, I woke up to find an eviction notice taped to my door. No warning, no conversation, just a cold, impersonal letter telling me I had 7 days to pack up and leave. I just stood there, staring at the paper in my hands, trying to process it. That was it. I was out of time. I spent the next few days selling everything I could. My TV, my furniture, even my laptop. The things I had worked years to build a life around, gone in a matter of hours. I kept my phone and a few changes of clothes. The rest? I pawned off for whatever I could get. And still, it wasn't enough. By the time my final day came, I had just enough to get a few nights in a cheap motel. After that, no plan, no safety net. I thought about calling my parents again. Maybe if they saw how desperate things had gotten, they'd come around. Maybe they'd finally see me instead of just my problems. I dialed my mom's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times, then straight to voicemail. She declined the call. I didn't bother trying again. As I locked up my apartment for the last time, I realized something. For years I had been their safety net, but no one had ever been mine. The motel was depressing. The kind of place where people checked in but didn't always check out. The walls were thin, the sheets smelled like cigarette smoke, and I could hear my neighbor coughing through the night, probably in the same situation I was. I had just enough cash for 5 nights. 5 days to figure something out before I'd be out on the street. I spent the first day looking for work. Any work. I didn't care what it was, remote, in person, under the table. I just needed something. But no one wanted to hire a guy who looked like he hadn't slept in the weeks, who got winded just walking up a flight of stairs. By the 3rd day, my body gave up on me. The fatigue hit like a truck, and the fever came back, and I barely had the strength to sit up. I knew what was happening. TB treatment wasn't a quick fix. I needed rest, real food, actual recovery, but rest wasn't an option when I was staring down homelessness. On the 4th day, my phone rang. For a second, my heart jumped. Maybe someone had changed their mind, maybe Lauren or Jake had come around. Then I saw the name on the screen. Matthew, my brother. We hadn't spoken in months. He was the successful one, the one who made 6 figures, who traveled, who never had to struggle. Growing up, we weren't close, but he always acted like he was better than me. He lived in a high-rise downtown, spent his weekends on yachts, and last I heard, he was planning some luxury vacation in Europe. So why was he calling now? I answered. Hey, Matt. Ethan, man, I heard things have been rough. His voice was cheerful, like he was catching up with an old friend. How are you holding up? I almost laughed. How was I holding up? I was broke, sick, and days away from living on the street. But sure, let's make small talk. Not great, I admitted, but I'll figure it out. There was a pause. Then, in that same fake friendly voice, Matthew said, Listen, the reason I'm calling, Mom and Dad wanted me to talk to you about Grandma's inheritance. I felt my stomach drop. You know, with everything going on, he continued, they figured you probably wouldn't be needing your share. Since, no, you're not really in a position to use it. I clenched my jaw. You mean they want me to sign it over to you? Well, yeah, he said, as if it were obvious. I mean, we both know you're struggling, man. It's not like a lump sum of cash is going to fix everything. You should just let Mom and Dad handle it. Handle it. Like I was already gone. I don't know what hit me harder. The audacity of the call, the realization that my own family had already written me off. I let out a short, bitter laugh. Wow. So they don't care that I'm sick, but they do care about my money? Matthew sighed like I was the unreasonable one. Come on, Ethan, don't make this difficult. For the first time in my life, I hung up on him, and that was when I knew. I was truly on my own. After I hung up on Matthew, I just sat there, staring at the peeling wallpaper in my motel room. I wasn't even surprised. I should have seen it coming. My family didn't care about me, just what I could offer. And now that I had nothing left to give, I was nothing to them. I tried to be angry, tried to hold onto the rage, to let it fuel me. But the truth? I was just tired. So I did what I'd been avoiding. I started looking up homeless shelters. The first one I called was full. The second had a wait list. The third one didn't answer at all. My chest felt tight, not just from the sickness, but from the sheer weight of it all. The motel was paid for one more night. After that, nowhere to go. I thought about calling Jake again. Maybe if I really explained things, if I swallowed my pride and begged, he'd let me crash on his couch, just for a little while. I stared at my phone, my finger hovering over his contact. Then I stopped. Why was I doing this to myself? The people I had once called family, the people I had helped, had chosen to leave me behind. Every single one of them had made their decision. And now, it was time for me to make mine. I looked around the motel room. My bag sat in the corner, barely filled. It was strange, realizing how little I actually had. I wasn't going to waste any more energy hoping for people who had already shown me where I stood. The only thing I could do now was survive. The morning I had to leave the motel, I woke up feeling like my body was made of lead. My chest was tight, my head was pounding, and every breath felt like it took effort. But I couldn't stop. I had to move. I packed my bag, what little I had left, and walked out into the cold morning air. The sun was just coming up, casting everything in this soft golden light. It should have been beautiful, but to me, it just felt empty. I had no idea where to go. I wandered for a while, trying to figure out my next move. Shelters were still full, and I had no money left for another motel. The best I could do was find a place to sit, to rest, to think. That's when I saw the park. It wasn't much, just a few benches, some trees, a little pond where kids used to throw breadcrumbs for ducks. I used to walk through here all the time when life was normal, back when I had a home to go to. Now it was my best option. I sat down on a bench, clutching my bag to my chest. The world around me kept moving, cars passing, people laughing, families enjoying their day. None of them looked at me. None of them saw me. I used to be the guy people relied on. Now I was just another face in the background, another person they stepped around without a second thought. I leaned back against the bench, staring up at the sky. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was just tired. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself close my eyes. I just needed a moment. Just a little rest. Then I'd figure out what came next. I don't know how long I sat there, eyes closed, just breathing. Minutes? Hours? Time didn't feel real anymore. Eventually, hunger pulled me back. My stomach ached, a sharp reminder that I hadn't eaten in almost 2 days. I checked my pockets. A few crumpled bills, barely enough for a cheap sandwich at a gas station. That was it. I had never stolen anything in my life, but for the first time I understood why people did. The thought sat heavy in my mind as I walked, trying to find something, anything cheap enough to stretch the little money I had left. That's when I passed a cafe. Through the window I saw a guy about my age, laughing with his friends, barely touching the plate of food in front of him. It hit me then, how different my life had been just a few months ago. That used to be me. Eating without thinking, spending without worry, never imagining that everything could fall apart so fast. Now, I was standing outside, wondering if the half-eaten sandwich on his plate would end up in the trash. I turned away before I could think about it too much. Instead, I found a gas station and bought the cheapest thing I could, one of those sad, pre-packaged sandwiches that tasted like cardboard. But it was food, and right now, that was enough. I walked back to the park and sat down with my meal, forcing myself to eat slowly to make it last. That's when I heard someone behind me. "Hey man, you good?" I turned and saw a guy I didn't recognize. Mid-40s, worn-out clothes, tired eyes. I knew that look. Homeless, just like me. He nodded toward my sandwich. "If you don't finish that, I'll take what's left." I stared at him for a second. Then, without thinking, I tore it in half and handed him a piece. He grinned. "Appreciate it, man." We ate in silence, and for the first time in days, I didn't feel completely invisible. The guy's name was Tony. We sat there in silence for a while, eating what little we had. Then out of nowhere, he chuckled. "You're new to this," he said, glancing at me. I can tell." I swallowed a bite of my sandwich and nodded. "Yeah." Tony leaned back against the bench, stretching his arms. "Let me guess, lost your job, lost your home, and now everyone you thought you could count on is suddenly too busy to care?" I looked at him surprised. "Pretty much." He smirked. "Happens more than you'd think." I wasn't sure what to say to that, so I just stared at the ground. Tony sighed. Look, man, I ain't got much, but I've been doing this a while. If you're smart, you'll learn fast. I frowned. Learn what? He started ticking off on his fingers. Where to sleep where the cops won't hassle you. Which churches do meal handouts without making you sit through a sermon first. And most importantly, who to trust and who to stay the hell away from. I hesitated. Why are you helping me? Tony shrugged. Because someone helped me once. And because, trust me, it's a lot harder if you go at it alone. I stared at him, trying to decide if I should believe him. Every instinct in me wanted to say no, to push him away. I'd spent weeks getting nothing but rejection. Why should I try to trust a stranger now? But then I thought about my family, my so-called friends, the people who had every reason to help me but didn't. And here was a man with nothing, although offering me more kindness than any of them. I exhaled. Okay, I said. What do I need to know? Tony grinned. Now you're thinking. And just like that, I had someone in my corner. Tony wasn't lying. There was a lot to learn. That night, he showed me where to sleep without getting hassled. Cops clear out most spots early in the morning, he explained. You don't want to be there when they do. We walked for miles until we reached an alley behind a laundromat. It smelled like detergent, and the dryers hummed through the walls. This one's good, Tony said, settling down against a crate. Security cameras, but no one cares enough to check them. If you don't cause trouble, they won't bother you. I hesitated before sitting down. The ground was cold. My body ached. I had spent my entire life avoiding places like this. And now it was my reality. I barely slept. Every little noise had me on edge. Footsteps, distant sirens, rustling in the trash nearby. But Tony? He was out in minutes, like he'd done this 100 times before. By morning, I understood why he had warned me about the cops. A patrol car crawled past, and Tony nudged me awake just in time. Move now, he muttered. We grabbed our bags and walked off like we had somewhere to be. That became the routine. Keep moving, stay invisible, and never get too comfortable. During the day, Tony took me to places I never knew existed. Churches that gave out free meals, libraries where we could charge our phones, even a soup kitchen with a guy who let us wash up in the back. Clean yourself up when you can, Tony told me. People treat you different when you don't look homeless. He was right. The first time I walked into a store with a fresh shirt and a clean face, no one looked twice at me. No wary glances, no suspicion. It was like I existed again. That night, as we sat in the park with a couple of sandwiches from a church pantry, Tony asked, You still hoping your family's gonna call? I shook my head. No. For the first time since this all started, I didn't even check my phone. I was done waiting for people who had already left me behind. Weeks passed. I adjusted. I stopped thinking of myself as a guy who used to have a home, used to have a job, used to have people who cared. That person didn't exist anymore. Now, I was just surviving. Tony and I stuck together, but I knew this wasn't his responsibility. He had his own struggles, his own past that I didn't pry into. He'd helped me, and I was grateful. But eventually I had to figure things out on my own. So I did. I found a shelter that let me shower and keep a few belongings in a locker. I picked up odd jobs, scraping gum off the bottom of tables, sweeping floors, cleaning bathrooms. It wasn't much, but it was something. Then one day, an old coworker, Mark, walked into the coffee shop where I was mopping floors. I froze. For a second, I thought he wouldn't recognize me, but then his eyes widened. Ethan? I forced a smile. Hey, man. What happened to you? His voice was quiet, like he wasn't sure he wanted to know. I almost laughed. What happened? My family happened. My friends happened. Life happened. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I shrugged. Just had a rough time. Mark looked uncomfortable, like he wanted to leave, but then he hesitated. Listen, I don't know what you're dealing with, but if you need work, my company's hiring. Nothing fancy, just warehouse stuff. I stared at him. Are you serious? He nodded. I can put in a word for you. It's not much, but it's something. Something. For the first time in months, I felt something that wasn't exhaustion or bitterness. Hope. 2 weeks later, I had a job, a real one. It was brutal, long shifts, backbreaking work, But I didn't care. I saved every penny, sleeping in shelters and eating at food pantries. And after 3 months, I had enough for a tiny studio apartment. It wasn't much, just a single room with a mattress on the floor. But it was mine. One night, as I sat on that mattress, staring at the ceiling, I checked my phone for the first time in weeks. Dozens of missed calls. My mom, my sister, even Jake. I didn't call them back. They had made their choice, and now I was making mine. I was done looking for people to save me. I had saved myself.